what it makes me feel like.
I think for me, I really like what Alex said as well, because it's such an awe-inspiring question, right? And, it's so hard to even answer your question, Andre. How does this awe-inspiring question make you feel? But I think when I was reading the Heidegger text, he talks about, being open to learning. And I think that's what this question kind of poses in me, like the openness that I know so little. And to even start to approach this question is so difficult. So I come into this moment, I come into this question just kind of aware of how much there's to know in a sense, but also interrogating that sort of feeling in itself, right? Of like, what am I even attempting in that? So anyway, that's what I think.
Do you feel transformed, like having stood in the question more seriously and opened yourself to it?
Serious, but also I'm so small yet so big, in this question, right? Like you're sort of everything and nothing through this scope.
I think I have a similar response to the question as Catherine's. I think what I experience is sort of like an open, or like a sort of like, just an openness to be open is a sort of like, but it's not an everyday, event or act to open to the open. So I feel like for me, it opens me up as much to, I think in the state that Alex is talking about is sort of wonder and awe. And I think for me, then also I would add to that like beauty, and to the creative act of contemplation, of philosophical thinking, as opposed to like calculative reasoning or something, which really has an entirely different, protocol, methodology, intent, or aim, or telos. It's after something else. It's more just already complete in the act of opening. So I feel like reading, rereading, or asking that question repeatedly, right? Like as many times as he does, it's kind of like he keeps coming back to this like bell that he's striking. And I feel like what it creates back to the sort of openness is sort of like a sense of a state of openness, or maybe like mindfulness, or like open, of sort of like the creative act of contemplating. But it might as well be like I'm staring at flowers or something, or like being with a friend and looking at some skyline or something. Like it's just kind of like a very gazy sort of state that the question moves me into.
Yeah, I'm wondering about this, wonder, awe, beauty. Is there not also the sort of underside in a way? There is a sense of the sublime here, or there's a sense of, negativity, or, we're confronted by this, or with this question, and I think first and foremost, it stabs us in a way, or it snaps us, it forces us, it snaps us out of our everydayness, right? All of a sudden you're like, oh, whoa, wait a minute, yeah, right. All the shit we take for granted. Look at this lot, I agree with everyone, but I'm just wondering if there's also, this is an open question, that yes, there is a sense of, the philosopher contemplating the ultimate originary question, but there's also something, he talks about this, individuals as well as people. This is the first paragraph, ask many questions in the course of their historical passage through time, but they rarely ever actually come and ask this question, right? Because we're all absorbed in this kind of everydayness. Anyway, terror, horror, yeah, exactly, right? There's this sense of this kind of sublime. Maybe, I don't know what you think about that. But.
Sublime makes sense to me. So does beauty.
Yeah.
Poeticity of being for the poeticity of thinking.
Yeah, it's almost, I don't want to say a shock, but there's something that grabs us, that like shakes us out of our lethargy, really, right? And then this should be the fundamental purpose of philosophy. I don't know, but
Yeah, well, it's Chris, going off what you were saying, I feel like it ties back to the word that was in my head, sort of, while grappling with this question, was the other word that Alex mentioned. Alex really just crushed it, and I think throughout all the things that everyone else has been like, yes, I feel this aspect of it. And Alex just got all of them, but Alex, you mentioned notions of like play and sort of like almost sort of like a childlikeness to this, and that was very much part of my experience with this, especially that early passage where he just sort of reduces it down to just why. And then, as he puts it, sort of he recoils the question back upon itself. Why the why? Which immediately struck me as just sort of that's a sort of question that you normally only hear from a child. And in this, I felt like it was very destabilizing to sort of ponder this question. But I felt like the way that the text explored it was in a way that tried to emphasize the more playful and open side of that sort of expansion and destabilization, as opposed to leaning into the at least in the section that we read, the sort of the horror that comes with things sort of being kicked out from you. And lastly, I just want to say it reminds me of what I can't remember the literary theorist here. There was a Russian literary theorist who wrote about Tolstoy, that Tolstoy's power with images was to make the familiar strange. And that was sort of the beauty of his art. And I feel like this question of why, just so sort of why is there being instead of nothing, is just sort of it's like a universal solvent that just sort of makes everything a little more strange as soon as you start to contemplate it.
Can I ask a question? I like this idea of the child. I don't know. Is there like a figure of the child in Heidegger? I'm trying to think. But it's interesting, and I'm just wondering about that. Did you think, because what I
this
said
is my first time reading Heidegger, so someone else is gonna have to weigh in on that, Chris.
But also to Alex, this idea. You first said it. This idea that the question has to shake us out of our sort of everydayness. So in other words, the adult, like we're kind of socialized into accepting this, reality in a way. And you mentioned the child as if we're going, sort of the question forces us to go back to a more originary or creative or certainly a state in which we're not jaded yet, or we're not whatever you know how it is, right? I'm wondering about.
Yeah, I am definitely, and I wonder the relationship between terror there also. I have two young children. I have a 4 and a 7-year-old, and they wake up in the middle of the night afraid. There are a lot of others in their universe that are not familiar yet. That is a great, the Tolstoy, the world is not familiar, and that the uncanniness of the unfamiliar. I think there's an interesting, like the reason why childishness or childlikeness would not be like either innocence nor less sophisticated or anything like that. It would be more of a radical openness, that what Derrida was talking about kind of always that unconditional openness prior to not having already framed the possibilities of what the answers could be. And so I wonder if the terror aspect is the flip side of whimsy, and you can't have one without the capacity for the other.
And just
It's
a
wonderful.
quick note here.
Hold on, Chris. We have 5 minutes, and I would like anyone who has not responded to the question, especially on a personal level, how it felt.
I think that means me.
Yeah.
I have a really hard time responding to this question on a personal or emotional level. I think reading Heidegger, as somebody who spent the last couple years reading a lot of Francois Laruelle, I just see a lot of his criticisms of Heidegger, like really intently put forward. But I think that So I read it very cynically, I think. But I think that there's something interesting about this idea of the process of the leap, as well as the like recoil, and what a couple of you have mentioned, this confusion of like figure and ground. Like there's something about that like process which I find really interesting in terms of this question, because it does pose this sort of process of like conflation and moving away and bringing in new, and that there is like the propulsion of that might be wonder, but the effect of it is also terror. But I'm interested in the form of the process itself, to like put oneself outside of things, but then also to have a ground that then gets subsumed into the question that you're asking.
Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting.
And if Romis or Juan Carlos would like to like add anything, or you don't have to, we can just move on. But if you'd like to.
No. Thoughts to add, maybe.
Yes, please.
It's also already in resonance with what I've heard. So for me, what is in that question is purely also a kind of a grounding, because it connects us with a certain humbleness. Like we are just reaching limits of comprehension. So for me, it's a kind of a gesture, universal gesture, that just by applying it is already having its impact. Stepping back and asking those two big questions. It's something that I think it's should be actually way more common, way more like a practice that I would love to see more, because it does something to our perception with the planet, with other beings, and so on and so on. Yeah. So it's training us to dwell a little bit longer in that too big, too uncanny, too intimidating space.
I think Heidegger would share your feeling that he wishes that there was more. I think he would say like historical Dasein that would allow for people to enter this the way you're saying. Like, it should be more common in the culture. I think he wants this too. Okay, so let's just close this. It's about to end. We'll jump right back into the same link, and then Paris will start his presentation. Good?